Welcome to our May coffee hour. My name is Agnieszka Carpenter and I'm the Executive Director of BioME. Coffee Hour is our monthly virtual series that everybody enjoys. And today is a very special one because we are talking about two industries, aquaculture and bioscience. There's a lot of crossover, there's a lot of room for collaboration, and both of these industries are very active and growing in Maine. So I'm very excited for today's event. And we have four amazing speakers. We have Erik Heim from Nordic Aquafarms. We have Dr. Tudor from the Aquaculture Research Institute at Maine. We have Bill Keleher at Kennebec River Biosciences. And we have Patrick Wahlig from Falmouth High School, who is the winner of our Maine BioGenius competition that we just held last month. And before I start, just a couple logistics. I wanted to tell you that the chat function is on. So if anybody has questions, please leave them in the chat. After the four presentations, we will have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So feel free to leave your questions there, or you can also save your question and ask it in person later. And I also wanted to thank all of our sponsors. Can I have the next slide, please? These are our annual sponsors, and without them, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So thank you so much for your support, for your continuous support of BioME. And with that, I think we're going to start our coffee hour today. Also, feel free to leave any remarks, comments, or just to say hi in the chat. We like to keep these events fairly interactive and just to, know that you're there. Okay, so with that, we're going to move to our first speaker. And our first speaker today is Dr. Scarlett Tudor from University of Maine.
Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and share some slides that I put together. Perfect. And so today what I'm gonna be talking a lot about is sort of already how we use bioscience and aquaculture, but how our new diagnostic and research laboratory is really a place where we're starting to see how bioscience can really help aquaculture needs. Just a little bit of a background. I will preface this by saying I am from the Midwest. I am not from a coastal community. A coastal life is not inherent sort of in my cultural background. But these are things I fully believe in terms of being an environmentalist and thinking about food production more sustainably. And I think that there are a lot of great things that are happening right now in Maine that poise us to be a leader in aquaculture, certainly for domestic production, but also global production. And so we already produce a lot of aquaculture products. Actually, salmon is the second leading import into the United States in terms of seafood. So having companies like Nordic and Whole Oceans are going to be extremely important into just our meeting a demand that already exists in this country. Maine has, again, several new land-based facilities bringing a whole ton of technology to our state and even increasing the levels of technology that we need to make these facilities even more sustainable, to keep them going for many generations. And so, again, Maine has this potential to be a really important seafood producer nationally. And it's sort of odd when I hear this statistic, it's sort of shocking that the US imports 91% of its seafood. And I know when being in Maine, it's sort of hard to think about that because we get fresh seafood all the time. But growing up in Ohio, I didn't eat seafood. I thought seafood was gross, but the reason I thought that is because I never had access to fresh, high quality seafood. And now that I live here, I eat it all the time, right? So our country really does have a large demand for these products that isn't already being satisfied. And so we're importing them from places with different regulations, different rules, less sustainability than we have here. So again, just highlighting the real importance for these aquaculture technologies. So this is a new facility. It's the Aquatic Animal Health Lab. And this lab is within the Diagnostic and Research Lab on campus. This is a collaboration between the university and the university's cooperative extension. And in this facility, we do all kinds of things that people typically don't think about in terms of aquaculture. So one, this is a specialized containment facility, so we can work with human pathogens. Like that's the level of biosecurity that happens in this building. And we can work with new pathogens and new and emerging species in Maine. So having this facility means that we are today ready to take care of any research needs that may happen, or if we have, like we're seeing now in a pandemic of COVID, this is not something that we were planning on happening, but it happened. And there was even discussions about using our lab for some COVID research. So this facility is a really important resource in our area. What makes this really unique though, is that it has these high containment aquatic facilities. So there's high level of containment that we can rear fish, look at disease, look at different studies that we would not be able to do without this facility. Again, I think when people think about aquaculture, you're thinking about, oh, it's fish farming. It's so much more than fish farming. And you'll hear, I'm sure, from Erik and certainly Bill, right? We're talking about microbiology. We're talking about engineering. We're talking about pharmaceutical development, feed development. So there's a lot of different sciences that are really needed in order to grow this industry and again, to make it sustainable. And just as sort of an example, I can talk a little bit about the work that we do to improve salmon culture in Maine. So right now, one of the largest hindrances to net pen culture in Maine is sea lice. It's an external parasite. And you can see the economic sort of impact is almost $1 billion every year in the global market. So this is a serious problem and a hindrance. And so we develop and do efficacy trials for new bath treatments, in-feed treatments. We're even working on vaccines, right? So the development of these vaccines for sea lice makes the treatment of these lice more environmentally friendly, because now we can vaccinate fish in their sort of land-based facilities so that they are able to cope with sea lice once they're out in the net pen. So again, vaccines is not always something that you think of when you think about aquaculture. We also do studies looking at pharmacokinetics and residual trials, looking at when fish are treated with medications, how long does that medication persist in the edible tissues, again, to make sure that once we've grown salmon and if they need some sort of treatment, that they are safe for human consumption. So again, a lot of research and different science goes into these types of questions. We actually are hiring 2 new fish nutritionists, because I think some of these barriers of aquaculture in general is about feed, it's about disease, and it's about quality, right? And so how do we make a quality product that is disease-free and that we need to develop foods, right, that rely less on fisheries. So one of the parts that's difficult about culturing carnivorous fish is that they eat fish in the wild, which means that we have to put fish in their diets, or that's historically how we've dealt with that. And then needing fish meal and fish oil relies on fisheries that are already not sustainable, right? So there's a lot of research going into alternative things that we can use, alternative proteins. I think Spreading, one of the large feed producers in the country, now has just on the market an insect-based feed. And so we can actually grow these black soldier flies and incorporate their larvae into feed to replace fish meal, or partially replace fish meal, which is going to be, again, extremely important in the growth of aquaculture of these carnivorous type fishes. They're even using these micro encapsulation technologies. Again, not something that I'm like, oh, aquaculture, micro encapsulation. Of course we do that. But how we're using this technology is to increase the nutrients in the feed, like lipids, right? Something that these fish absolutely need to grow properly and to get to those market sizes that we want to see. And it's also a way to make sure that what we put in the feed actually gets delivered into the fish. And we can even think about using these applications, not just for nutrients, but also for medications. So sometimes when medications are delivered, they're top coated on a food, but then when you put it in water, it can be soluble. So you might be wasting some of that. So there's just a lot of ways in which we can improve nutrition, feeding the economics behind feeding these fish with these new technologies. We have another faculty coming that does nutrigenomics. And so this is looking at gene regulation and gene expression and the interaction between gene expression and nutrients and their diet, right? So we might be actually able to select for fish that are growing at the rates that we want. We can know exactly what they need in their diet. And again, these are all technologies that have been used in other areas, but we're starting to apply them in aquaculture. So I think that this is kind of a great place to kind of talk to people that are using technologies in other places that you would never think to use in aquaculture. And like just another example is we actually work with WL Gore. This is the company that makes Gore-Tex. They are actually collaborating with us on a method for sea lice, to handle sea lice. So again, all kinds of technologies that seem very different from one another have applications in aquaculture. So this is certainly a great time to share where aquaculture needs are with people that are advancing technologies for all other areas that then could be applied and to help this area grow within our state, and again, globally and nationally. I think I'm all set.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tudor. This is amazing. I think it's very eye-opening to see how innovative this industry is and how much crossover there is with bioscience. We truly appreciate your time. I know you're very busy today teaching. Thank you for teaching us. I definitely feel like I got some education here, even though it was only 10 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to move to our second speaker, and it's Erik Heim from Nordic Aquafarms, and we'll actually hear from someone who does hands-on aquaculture for, in Maine. Erik, whenever you're ready. And you need to unmute.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. Well, that was a perfect introduction. So thank you. The thing is, aquaculture is such an interesting industry because it's so diverse. And, the introduction was great now. And when you think about it, Maine has shellfish, seaweed, finfish, all kinds of things going on. So I'm going to share one perspective, sort of how parts of the industry is moving towards sustainable practices. So I'm not going to use slides, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a visual tour at the end of this talk of what we're doing in Maine. So you get a first-hand visual impression of what these things look like. So I thought the introduction was great. And, the thing is that aquaculture has been around for a long time, but the industry as we know today is very young. And despite that, farm fish has surpassed wild catch in volume globally in just a few decades. That's a pretty amazing development. And it's been a journey also with challenges for sure when things move that fast. And all the innovation going on is just so encouraging in terms of making it more and more sustainable and focusing on fish welfare and so on. So, and I think the 90% seafood deficit issue is interesting also because one of the things we are focused on is your CO2 footprint. So basically all the fresh seafood you take into this country has double or more the CO2 footprint than local production. So that's something, we need to be more and more focused on is thinking about fresh seafood as a local product and not shipping it all across the world with the CO2 footprint there. So our story is really that I got into this 7 years ago. I actually founded this company in Norway, and that's not Norway, Maine, but Norway in Europe. With a sustainable vision for farming. And it really builds on to minimize ocean impacts to the furthest degree, which you need to do in some locations. There is really no approach that has more capability to do that than land-based aquaculture, which we are doing. Now, I'm a champion for all sustainable seafood, but we are a company that is only land-based using so-called RAS technology or recirculating aquaculture technology. This is something Maine uses also in their Franklin Center. So, and it started really with a lot of some of the challenges historically in the industry. And today, I would say, some of the criticism against the industry is historically deserved. Some of it is not. But typically, the concerns have been nutrient discharge, disease escapes, use of public waters, scarcity of locations that are suitable. And there's been certainly a contentious sort of public opinion thing going on in the US regarding this industry. But we're seeing the whole industry really moving to more and more sustainability, whether it's happening in the ocean or on land, as we are doing. So just 2 words about our company, and I'll get into a little bit, okay, what is this really about? So we were founded in Norway. So we established the first land-based salmon farm in Norway. At that time, Norway remains the biggest producer of salmon in the world. And we had quite a battle with the incumbent industry to get this through, actually. But we came through and have been successful. And we actually do 2 species. So we established the first large-scale operation for yellowtail kingfish in Denmark, where we have 2 farms also. Very good sushi fish if you haven't tried that. So altogether, we have 3 farms in operation today, producing excellent products. And in the US, we are doing a farm project in Maine and one in California for Atlantic salmon. So it's been a really steep learning curve for us. And we're so happy to see that we're actually the first company internationally that has produced salmon in a larger scale facility without any incidents the first 2 years. These are complex projects. So these are not off-the-shelf solutions. So it requires a lot of experience with design of the facilities and experienced staff to operate them. So in Maine, we spent 3 years designing, permitting, and preparing for construction to start in Maine, and we're almost ready to go. I just wanted to share a little bit of perspectives. It's sort of a jungle out there regarding this industry, talk about antibiotics and bleaching of salmon and so on. And, first thing first, the Western industry, whether it's in the ocean or land, hardly uses antibiotics anymore. So this is a myth that's floating around. And the industry does not bleach salmon either. So in our case, we use natural krill products, which sort of mirror the natural diet of a salmon, and that's how it gets its color. So there's a lot of misconceptions that players in this market need to navigate around this. So land-based, what is that really about? Some of you may know a lot about this, others not that much. It's basically production of fish in indoor facilities in tanks in a protected environment. And one of the strengths of this technology that we use is that we recycle the water continuously and treat it so we can reduce our water need compared to historical systems, for example, that use so-called flow-through, where they are dependent on large amounts of water to produce. So one of the strengths of RAS is that you can really control the water coming in and the water you exchange going out to biosecure levels. So, but the treatment level can vary significantly between facilities. So I just wanted to give an example of what we're doing to get to biosecurity, to protect our fish, but also the receiving waters. So what we do is we apply so-called ultrafiltration. And that, in this case, is 0.5 micron mesh size. And you can compare that to a strand of hair, which is 40 micron. So a couple benefits from that. First of all, we can significantly reduce pathogen risk in our production, and there are no sea lice getting through this. So we solved a couple of issues there. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the particle content in our water, it's actually lower than the surrounding ocean with this technology. So apply that with very strong UV dosing of the water, and that's how you get closer to biosecure levels. Another issue is feed metabolism and nutrients and the impact they can have on receiving waters. So what we do is we use so-called denitrification. Successfully, we have this in use in Europe. And what this really does, it takes out 90% of the nitrogen in the water you exchange. The nitrogen is the nutrient we want to manage. And we take out actually 99% of phosphorus, 99% of particles. And so all of these things come together to really reduce the impact when you start scaling up an operation on the local waters. And the good story is that we can recycle all this stuff. So in our case in Maine, it goes to biogas production. So that's a big benefit. Another aspect for those who want to become familiar with this is the sort of concern about escapes. So well-designed land-based facilities will not have escapes. In our case, we never had any. And the only way a fish can get out is really through the discharge pipe. And that's where you put a series of physical barriers in. So you can essentially reach zero escape risk in a well-designed facility. And imagine how a fish will get through a 0.5 micron filter, for example. That's not going to happen. So obviously these facilities are on private land, and I'm going to show you, we have limited time, so I'm going to show you, just give you a quick guided tour of the facility that's coming up in Maine. Are you seeing my screen? Yes, okay, let's see. Just need to get this working in just a second. So wait a minute. Okay, that just disappeared. So bear with me a second. How many, so the facility, I'm gonna just go and get that just a second. No, that disappeared on me. Let me get it somewhere else. Here we go. Can you see this?
No, actually, but we might be able to share it. Just give us a second.
Yeah, there's always some technical issue going on, right? So let's see here. Let me try and share it again.
Okay, so Bree's actually sharing and she's going to play it, and you just keep talking, okay?
Okay, you're playing it? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so this is the project we've been working on for 3 years. It's been permitted locally and state level in Maine. I see it's a little bit choppy and going very slow, but okay. So this is basically an overview of the facility. It's located in Belfast, Maine. It's extremely choppy, isn't it? It's a 54-acre campus that's to be developed in multiple phases over the next years. This is actually the entrance area. So what we're doing there as a part of the campus concept is building an educational and visitor center. So combining historical building on the site, which used to be the old water district, with the salmon viewing tank and the trail system that goes by the nearby water as well. And then you can take a look into the campus. We have to be a little bit patient here because this is going very slow. The first sort of part of the facility is really our water intake and discharge treatment facility. You can consider this to be an advanced wastewater treatment facility that houses the technologies we just talked about. So it's there to ensure that we get biosecure water coming in, and also the water that we exchange also goes through a rigorous treatment process before it's discharged quite a bit offshore from the facility. And then we can move into, this is the main campus that you see here. The two big buildings are the so-called ongoing buildings where we take the fish to harvest size. And to the right here, you see our backup generation. So if we have an ice storm or something like that, we have power systems that kick in because we have live fish. And what you see here is the processing facility where basically the product is taken to fillet or to a whole gutted fish, head-on gutted fish. So really what we're trying to do is to integrate this very nicely into the terrain in this area. It's about 5 minutes outside of Belfast Center with green buffers. So you can't see this facility actually from Route 1, the main road. Other things in here, so it's worth noting that this facility has operation from egg to harvest. So Like the green roof facility here is where we hatch our eggs and grow them to a certain size before they are transferred over to the main buildings on the other side. So right now we are heading into final engineering of this facility, and are really looking forward to getting into construction in the near future. So that's really just a short summary. So you had an opportunity to take a look at what this is, and just close it off. We appreciate the collaboration we have with UMaine. We work well with UMaine and also UNE here that also has an aquaculture department. So this industry collaboration with academia is really important for the future of the industry in Maine. So that was a short intro to land-based. I guess I spent my time with my...
No, you're good. This was perfect. And please don't worry that it was choppy. This is pretty common with sharing video when there's a lot of people on the meeting, but we were still able to see just fine. Also, Erik, if you're comfortable sharing that link to the video, you can email it to me later, or we can share it in the chat so people can watch it later, or they can.
You can do that. You have the link, right? So
yeah. So is it okay to put it in the chat?
That's fine. It's on our Facebook page, Maine, as well. Okay. So no problem.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to show it to other people, I think it's pretty incredible. And thank you so much for that overview. It was great to virtually go and see Nordic Aquafarms. Okay, so with that, we will move to Bill Keleher from Kennebec River Biosciences. I feel like we have a really nice flow from an academic introduction through aquaculture farm, and now we're moving to how bioscience can actually address some of the issues or some of the challenges that aquaculture businesses might face. So Bill, whenever you're ready.
Gotta go back here. Oop, let's see, there we go. There we go. Thanks, Aneska. So yeah, I think we fit in a good spot between, we kind of are in the middle of, you know, your basic research at UMaine and Erik's facility at Nordic. We are an aquatic animal health company. We're located in Richmond. We just, this past April, we just celebrated 25 years of being around. So, you know, we made it this far through some highs and lows in a pandemic. So as others have said, aquaculture is increasingly becoming important as a protein source. We now grow more fish than we catch. I like to tell people who always ask me, do you eat farm fish? I said, well, yes. And if everyone ate wild fish, there'd be no more wild fish. So we need to farm more. As you can see, we get great feed conversion rates, and it is going to be one of the major players in the future for protein as our population grows. In years past, when people asked me what our company did, you know, I would say, well, you know, we're a disease testing lab, or, you know, we do vaccines, and really, I've sort of been thinking about this. What we really are is a risk management company. We try to help farms manage the risks around pathogens so that they don't have losses on their farm. And so, you know, typically I get the comment I get from folks initially, especially if they're new to, you know, aquaculture, we're never going to have any disease issues. And I give them my card, and, you know, typically a couple of years later, I hear from them, or 6 months later, depending on what they do or don't do. So really, our company is there to aid fish farmers across the spectrum: food, ornamentals, bait fish, sport fish. And we are really helping them to, you know, provide a range of products and services that helps them to grow fish and shellfish better. So kind of in a nutshell, what we do, we're kind of, you know, I hate the term one-stop shop, but we have various aspects to our company. We do have laboratory services. Under that kind of heading, we have, you know, your typical diagnostic services. I'm losing animals on the farm. What's going on? What's killing them? If it's a pathogen, what is it? We also, a large part of our company, we perform regulatory testing. So when folks want to move aquatic animals either interstate or internationally, you need a lab like ours that will screen for certain pathogens to make sure they're not on the farm and certify they're not there before those animals are shipped interstate or internationally. We also have a veterinarian on staff. I come from the microbiological wing of animal health. A veterinarian is more the clinical person, can write prescriptions, can use vaccines and other things. And so it's a good complement to the lab part of our business. And particularly as more and more things are being shipped in and out of the country, it's important to have a veterinarian on staff. One of the other key pieces, our company basically started as a diagnostic testing lab. And in that arena, we compete against a lot of state and university labs, and that's difficult for making money. And so we decided, we really need to expand for a number of reasons into products. And so with some funding from MTI initially, we have really gotten into autogenous vaccines. And so what that means is, we'll go on a farm and identify what pathogens are there, what pathogen risks they might have, and we create a tailored vaccine solution for the farm, which is really kind of novel. Some of the big companies like, Zoetis and Merck, they are looking at the big diseases. They're producing vaccines for many markets. And so we've really kind of flipped that paradigm on its head, where we're going in and really coming up with a vaccine solution for the farm. The other aspect of that is, we are looking at ways to address growth, maybe some pinch points in production cycles. And so we really started looking at probiotics, which I'll touch on a little bit later, and particularly novel aquatic probiotics, not just taking terrestrial probiotics and then moving them into fish farming or shellfish farming. A big part of our company, as I mentioned, tied to our lab services, are regulatory logistics, just helping farmers move animals, typically live, from point A to point B. And then we do a lot of general consultation around any number of things related to aquatic animal health and regulations. So for our laboratory services, it's the full complement of testing that, people think of when they go into, either human or veterinary medicine. We do a lot of PCR, although much of our work is around sort of old school microbiology, where we're culturing things. We use a number of cell lines derived from various fish species to screen for viruses that we're looking for. We also grow a lot of screen a lot of our animals using typical microbiological media. One thing about that is, while PCR is great, it's sensitive, it has its uses. Because we also are a vaccine company, we want to have those bugs in hand. And so we want to be able to isolate those, archive them, characterize them, and then in many cases use them as a vaccine solution. Other parts that are sort of complementary, we do a lot of serology around our vaccines. We're looking at, when we deploy these vaccines in a farm, we want to know what titers, antibody titers look like pre-vaccination versus post-vaccination, to give the farmer an idea, just to maybe not how the fish will do, but just to show that the vaccine is having an effect in the fish. And then we also do histopathology and a range of other services that we can provide. I mean, we do, if we don't do it in-house, we generally work with the farms to work with a third-party vendor. The histopathology, for instance, we do the initial processing, but we send that out to a board-certified pathologist to examine. As I mentioned, custom vaccines are a big part. Right now, I think we're the only USDA licensed vaccine facility in the US that focuses on aquatic vaccines. And so what this process typically looks like is, we obviously isolate a bug, typically in association with some sort of mortality event. We then characterize that. We then can create a vaccine. A couple different ways we can deploy these vaccines. You can make an immersion vaccine where you dip the fish in it. You can inject the fish, or oral, which is there's still some work to be done on that. The immersion injectable have pros and cons. So it just depends on your particular situation and which one you want to use. And then it isn't a static kind of thing. It's very dynamic. We then continue to look at the populations of fish so we can refine the vaccine solution. We may need to subtract bugs out, add them in. So it's really an ongoing process. Regarding novel aquatic probiotics, with the advent of metagenomics, but also traditional sort of culturing, our company is looking at identifying and trialing different probiotics. We actually are looking and have an agreement with University of Rhode Island, one that we've worked with, are using successfully with shellfish growers, but also with some of the marine hatcheries for the control of Vibrio. So that one's worked out well. And then we have another one that we identified on our own and are looking to commercialize that. So I think there's growing interest in coming up with these novel probiotics, particularly aquatic probiotics, that can address the whole range of issues within aquaculture. I just kind of wanted to end. I think it's important to understand that in Maine, we really are, blessed to have just a great ecosystem around all the different companies and groups that we work with. These are some of the ones we work with from the Maine Aquaculture Association, and then all the, some of the companies that we work with directly. As you can see, some of them are more established, like Cook, but Erik's company Nordic and Kingfish Maine and American Unagi, some of the shellfish folks like Mook. It's just a great opportunity. And, we've been at this for 25 years. Historically, there hasn't been a lot going on in the US, and now it's really taking off, and really we're poised for a lot of growth, and will affect our company as well. We also have great relationships with, the University of Maine, the government folks at the state with DMR and Department of Ag and MTI. They've really put a lot of money into the sector, which is great, but also our federal partners, particularly with the USARS that has a broodstock program in Franklin, and then USDA APHIS, which is really doing a lot over the last couple of years around developing business plan and standards for farm raised aquatic animals, which is great. I mean, it really is. Maine is sort of the epicenter, and I know people say it all the time that we're sort of the gold standard in aquatic animal health. We really are well ahead, and really people are looking to us for leadership around aquatic animal health because of the way we've dealt with our industry and just the professionals we have on all sorts of levels. So with that, I'll end.
Thank you so much, Bill. I think a lot of us today learned a lot of new information about your company. I was familiar more or less because I did a tour once, and my mind was blown as to how vaccines for fish are made. I had no idea. Okay, so now it's time for our fourth speaker, our black horse. If you're wondering why we have a high school student speaking to us, at coffee hour events, we usually highlight some cool research that's being done in Maine. And I wanted to shed a light on the fact that some really cool research is being done on the high school level. And so Patrick is the winner of our Maine BioGenius Challenge. BioGenius is an international competition for bioscience for high school students who do research in bioscience. And it just so happened that Patrick's research has to do with fish. So I thought it was very fitting. Plus, we were super impressed with his presentation, and I couldn't wait to share it with our community. So Patrick, whenever you're ready, it's your time.
Sure, let me just share my screen, right?
Absolutely.
Share screen. You guys can see it, right?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Patrick Wahlig, and I'm a student at Falmouth High School. Before I start, I would like to thank the Bioscience Association of Maine for allowing me to present to all of you today. So I'm here for two reasons. One is because I was the first place winner of the high school BioME Student Showcase. This competition was an amazing experience for me to practice public speaking and conveying scientific information to others. It really was. It gave me the opportunity to do something I loved and network in the process. I can assure you that the cash prize I received from the competition will go right back into the fishing industry. The second reason was because of the nature of my research project I presented at the showcase. So the first time I ever went striped bass fishing was on my 13th birthday. My family had booked a fishing trip with a guide in Portland, and I was ecstatic. I remember traveling down to the docks early in the morning, smelling the salty air and watching the thin mist evaporate off the ocean's surface. Catching my first striper during that trip was an unforgettable experience. It was a beautiful fish with 7 studded lines running horizontally across its body. Measuring the fish, we found it to be 32 inches long, a bona fide Maine trophy striper. We released it and caught many more that day. During the trip, our guide described a research project called Snap a Striper, led by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. This project had the goal of determining the natal origin, or the birthplace, of Maine-caught striped bass through the collection of various data points. Right, they were looking at morphometrics and otoliths. Identifying striped bass natal origin would directly inform fishery management policy by identifying the locations that must be protected. The striped bass population was fragile and threatened, and this program could prove critical to their survival. This resonated with me, even though I had seen my first striped bass only hours before. After that fishing trip, I was an 8th grader on a mission. I was going to do all I could to help the striped bass population recover. That fall, I got in touch with the researchers behind the Snap a Striper program, Mr. Zachary Whitner and Dr. Lisa Kerr. I explained to them my motivation, and they brought me on board, introducing me to the complex world of striped bass research. That leads me to this year's project, which was titled Stable Isotope Analysis of Maine-Caught Striped Bass Otoliths as a Means of Determining Natal Origin. In a previous study, I dissected otoliths and scales from striped bass, comparing the two in aging accuracy. This year, my project had the goal of determining the natal origin, or the birthplace, of Maine striped bass through the stable isotope analysis of their otoliths. Again, I conducted this project because I'm a lifelong Mainer. Like many fishermen, I feel an obligation to do all I can to fix the mistakes of my predecessors and help striped bass populations recover to their once great sizes. So here are 3 key points of my project. One is that the striped bass is of great economic and natural importance to Maine. 2 is the isotope analysis of the striped bass otolith is an effective method of determining natal origin. Establishing the natal origin of Maine-caught striped bass identifies spawning grounds that must be protected as fish populations recover. So again, there are 2 reasons that I got into this study. One is that I like the fish. 2 is that the striped bass fishery is of great importance to the state of Maine. Statewide, the striped bass fishery supported 3,110 jobs and generated $202 million in revenue in 2016 alone. In the same year, the nation's striped bass fishery accounted for more than 48 million pounds of landed fish by both commercial and recreational anglers. This total fishing activity contributed a total of $7.8 billion toward our nation's gross domestic product. If the fishery were to falter, thousands of people would lose their jobs and billions of dollars would be lost. But here's the issue. It's already happening. In 1973, the commercial striped bass catch was 14.7 million pounds. People were loving it. Money was coming in, tourists were attracted, and all was well. Then the tragedy of the commons ensued. Improper stock management, the building of dams, and water pollution devastated striper populations across the coast, nearly completely eliminating Maine's native striped bass population. By 1983, that 14.7 million pound catch had dropped to only 1.7 million pounds. The striper population has mostly recovered, but data shows that history is bound to repeat itself if regulations are not modified. These striped bass are highly migratory. If we knew where a Maine striped bass population was coming from or their origins, we could better target regulations and measure the success of conservation projects over time. But how can we determine fish origin? Otoliths are calcified inner ear structures located directly behind a fish's brain. Otoliths incorporate matter reflective of the body of water a fish inhabits at a certain time. Of critical relevance to this study, the core of the otolith consists of matter incorporated exclusively during the first year of a fish's life. Striped bass larvae spend the first few years of their life in their natal waters. Therefore, the composition of a striped bass otolith core is reflective of the fish's birthplace. The isotope fingerprint of an otolith core can be matched to the isotope profile of the body of water in which the fish was born. For this study, Maine caught striped bass heads were submitted by local fishermen to the Snap-a-Striper project conducted by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. Otoliths were dissected and otolith cores were milled out, converted to a powder form. Powdered cores were then submitted to the University of Arizona for stable isotope analysis. As a part of the previous study and prior to the pandemic, I collected fish heads from fishermen and dissected the otoliths from the heads. They were then prepared and shipped for stable isotope analysis. 2 ranges were established through this study, a native Maine range and a Chesapeake Bay range. The Maine data was derived from striped bass native to the Kennebec River in Maine. The Chesapeake data was derived from white perch native to the Chesapeake Bay. White perch were used as a proxy for striped bass as no striped bass data was available. White perch, however, is a close relative to the striped bass. The 2 species are sympatric or co-occurring and can even interbreed, supporting the use of white perch as a proxy for striped bass in this study. So ranges were created and the bass of unknown origin were compared to these ranges. This study found that 4 of 72 Maine caught bass had delta 18O values consistent with a Maine natal origin or a Maine-based spawning ground. 27 of 72 Maine caught bass had delta 18O values consistent with a Chesapeake Bay origin, and 41 of 72 Maine caught bass were of indeterminate origin. Their isotope profile did not fit within either established range. Also, a t-test was run to compare the Maine caught bass population and the native Maine population from the Kennebec River. The result of the t-test was a p-value of less than 0.01. This low p-value suggests that the groups are indeed different and that the population of native Maine striped bass within the entire Maine striper population is very small. Stable oxygen isotope analysis appears to be an effective method of establishing the natal origin of Maine caught striped bass. Isotope values for the random sample fit within established ranges of different locations. So 4 of 72 Maine caught bass had delta 18O values consistent with a Maine natal origin or a Maine-based spawning ground. This data reflects the health and relative contribution of recently restored historic Maine spawning grounds. There is a small but present population of native fish in Maine's striped bass stock. The Chesapeake Bay, the major nursery for Atlantic coast striped bass, must be protected to sustain striper populations. A large portion of all fish collected by this study had determined origins within the Chesapeake Bay, accentuating the need for adequate protections. So the Chesapeake Bay is a well-established striped bass nursery. And if we think about it like an incubator and the striped bass are kind of the eggs, we have a lot of eggs in one basket here. So what's going to happen when the Chesapeake Bay's environment changes, maybe due to global warming or salinity changes, and that striped bass population within the Chesapeake Bay isn't sustainable and they die? We're going to lose a large chunk of our striped bass, our Atlantic coast striped bass population. That's why we need these smaller native nurseries. They're going to serve as a safeguard against population collapse. They're also going to increase biodiversity and bolster the economies of local communities. That picture there in bottom right, that's the picture of me with the first striped bass I caught. I was talking about it earlier in this presentation. Yeah, that was the first fish I ever caught. So just to summarize here, the striped bass is of great economic and natural importance to Maine. In order to create meaningful regulations, the natal origin of the Maine striped bass population must be determined. Stable oxygen isotope analysis appears to be an effective method of establishing the natal origin of Maine caught striped bass. Isotope values for the fish collected in this study fit within established ranges of different locations. The data also displays that there is a small but present population of native fish in Maine striped bass stock. This population should be enhanced to increase biodiversity and serve as a safeguard against population collapse. The Chesapeake Bay, the major nursery for Atlantic coast striped bass, must be protected to sustain striper populations. Again, a large portion of all fish collected by this study had natal origins within the Chesapeake, highlighting the need for adequate protections. This is an exciting study that shows great promise as a tool to establish striped bass origin. The study would be further enhanced if isotopic signatures from otoliths of other important spawning grounds, for example, the Hudson and Delaware rivers, were incorporated. Also, to further validate their use as a proxy, white perch data might be compared head-to-head with actual striped bass otolith data. Even better, a striped bass otolith data bank might be established. Finally, greater citizen contribution, more fish heads means more otoliths, would not only provide a more representative Maine caught bass cohort, but would also increase awareness of ongoing striped bass conservation efforts. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks again for allowing me to speak to all of you guys today.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Always super impressed with your presentation skills and the level of your research. That was incredible. And Patrick will be representing Maine at the International BioGenius Finals next month. We wish you good luck. I'll certainly watch it if there's a possibility. And now we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. And I'll start with a question for Erik. And the question is, sorry, I'm scrolling through my chat here. Erik, how many jobs will your facility bring to the area? Do you plan on trying to source all services for construction and equipment as locally as possible?
Yeah, sure. So the economic development benefits for Maine are really important. So we have our US headquarters actually in Portland. So that's one of our offices. And that's basically working both in Maine and California. So then we have our operations in Belfast. So in Maine in total, we expect to have about 175 jobs. So we're already a team here, but a lot of job growth ahead. As far as construction and related services go, our strategy is to source as much as we can locally or in Maine. It's a tight market, so I think in the end we probably be forced to have a combination. And I guess the final piece to mention here is there's so many interfaces with other kinds of businesses involved here, like Bill's business and many others as well. So there's sort of a multiple layers of potential economic benefits for other types of businesses in Maine as well. So I think in the end, the economic footprint will be significant in terms of benefits for Maine.
I also kind of want to follow up on that a little bit, because one of my main goals in my position within ARI is workforce development. And so I'm just going to show a little, what we're doing. We're offering these hands-on courses that are for anybody. These are not just for undergraduate students. And we currently have courses in aquatic animal husbandry, shellfish culture, aquatic animal health, and recirculating aquaculture systems. These courses are sort of week-long lab-based crash courses, and that will have an online component for the lecture material. So if anybody listening thinks, I mean, even if you work in another company and you want to figure out how can I help the aquaculture industry and I'm interested in health, you can spend a week actually working in our diagnostic facility doing work that is similar to what Bill's lab is doing. Or, what is the technology involved with Erik's facility, right? And these short courses would allow you to get hands-on experience, to understand the aquaculture industry a bit better, but then to also really experience what sort of Bill and Erik and even Patrick are talking about, all of the sciences that go into aquaculture. We kind of hit on each of those. So if anybody's interested in like sort of workforce development, please let me know. And all of our courses, we have Bill is going to be asked to give a lecture in our aquatic animal health course, right? So we're involving all of these industries to make sure that the courses and information that we're giving are actually valued by the industry. And I think it's a great way to, in a short amount of time, get a broader perspective and some hands-on skills that are going to be important to the growth of this industry.
Thank you so much, Scarlett, for sharing that. We really appreciate it. I also wanted to mention that this event is being recorded and it will be available probably next week on our website and on our YouTube channel. So if you feel like you know someone who could benefit from those courses or just to see this event, please share the link to this event with them. I do have one question here for Bill. Bill, how long does a typical vaccine development take in the aquaculture world? What regulatory stages do aquaculture vaccine typically go through, if any?
Yeah, it depends on the type of vaccine. So within USDA Center for Veterinary Biologics, we basically have three types of vaccines: fully licensed autogenous, and then the US, which it has also another heading, veterinary exempt. So each of those have their own sort of lengths and hoops you got to go through. So for fully licensed, it's a very long process, typically a number of years. you got to characterize the seeds, you got to develop RPS data in the lab to see how the fish do, develop a challenge model. Under our licensed facility, we don't have to prove that the vaccine works, and there's pros and cons to that, but it basically, once we have a bug, it can take us, a couple of weeks, assuming we've worked out the culture conditions to have a vaccine ready. We don't always know whether it's going to work or how well it's going to work, but based on what's been published, we have a fair idea how that will work. So, but within that license, the licensed autogenous facility we have to do safety trials in fish. We have to run sterility and all these sort of quality control parameters. Under the vet exempt heading, the veterinarian has a lot more flexibility, and so that can be very quick, and we just have a lot more tools at our hand, to be able to produce a vaccine. So it really depends on what you're trying to go for and what heading you're going to fall under. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for answering that question. I do want to squeeze in a question for Patrick as well. Patrick, someone says, I am curious about the striped bass for which the natal origin was not able to be determined. Do you think there is another spawning ground? And another one that's related, curious if you think any striped bass from Canada should be moving into Maine waters.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one, right? Where are the bass that I couldn't figure out where they were coming from? Where are they coming from? And the way it works is the isotope ratio I measured has a latitudinal gradient. So the higher values or the less negative values tended to be from striped bass farther south, and the more negative values tended to be from striped bass further north. And what I saw was the Chesapeake Bay, they had higher numbers, the closer to a positive number, and the Maine striped bass had lower, and there was a big gap between those. So that's telling me is there are striped bass somewhere between the Chesapeake Bay and the state of Maine. And the two most likely rivers they could be coming from are the Hudson and Delaware rivers, right? Because those are between the state of Maine and Chesapeake Bay, and they're known to have a native population of striped bass. So the Hudson and Delaware rivers are two rivers I'd like to look at in the future. And then the second question, curious if you think striped bass from Canada could be moving into Maine waters. I think the answer there is, the border between the United States and Canada, fish don't know that border, right? So we're going to have striped bass moving across that border through. The Canadian striped bass are interesting, right? Because they can stay in Canada year round. It's pretty cold water up there. So I'd say there's some mixing of stocks just because, again, those striped bass don't know that border between the countries. They're going to mix back and forth. So I'd say there probably are some striped bass from Canada moving into Maine waters and some Maine striped bass moving into Canadian waters, right? So it's a mixing of stocks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Patrick. I'll squeeze in one more, and if you guys need to leave, please feel free. Thank you so much for joining us. This question is for Erik. How does aquaculture raised fish compare to naturally sourced fish in terms of cost of goods?
When you see naturally sourced fish, the question is, depends what that means. Are we talking wild catch versus aquaculture?
The question doesn't specify.
So basically, we source our fish basically from eggs, right? And we raise the fish from there on up. So it's a very different process than wild catch. So wild catch can come from anywhere, basically. So really the cost involved in wild catch depends on where it's coming from, how it's transported, and many factors like that. So it can vary greatly depending on the source. So I think in general, the pricing is the cost to market is in the same range. Although you see, for example, in the US, some wild salmon products, you get a higher price in the market than a typical farm salmon. Although again, farm salmon can vary greatly also in price point, depending on the quality of the product, if it's organic, other factors that can play into it. So it's not a black or white answer, to put it that way.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Okay, we do have some more questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. Typically after coffee hours, if anybody's interested in connecting with our speakers, please email us and we'll be happy to connect you if you have any additional questions. I also just wanted to say thank you to everybody who joined us today. In June, we're taking a break from coffee hours, but we'll be back in July. And then in August, we are actually trying to organize an in-person outdoors networking event. So please stay tuned. More information to come. We're hoping to do that. And with that, I just want to wish everybody a wonderful day. And thank you once again to all of our speakers and all of our attendees today. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.